And now let's move on to our third section and third principal tissue type in section 5.3, which is on muscle tissue, and their function is movement. So here are our learning objectives. To describe our muscle tissue, we need to know that our cells are going to contract here when they are stimulated, not simulated. They're going to contract. Their contraction causes movement. And we've got voluntary motion of our body parts. We'll get contraction of the heart and propulsion of material through the digestive tracts. So of course, we've got our three different types. Skeletal muscles are going to be the ones that give us voluntary motion. Our smooth muscle will be the one that gives the propulsion of material through the digestive and urinary tracts. And then our cardiac muscle will help with the contraction of our heart. We'll start off describing our skeletal muscle tissue. We describe this as being striated. So you can see these lines that are moving through the skeletal muscle tissue, and they are also known as voluntary muscle tissue, meaning that we have conscious thought and control over them. So when we think, hey, I want to contract my arm to pick up this cup, then we are able to do it. And by doing that, we can move our skeleton. These cells are going to be long cylindrical cells. They are going to be so long. Think about how they span, let's say, across your quadriceps femoris, going from your hip joint, crossing your knee joint. And so we're going to call these cylindrical cells skeletal muscle fibers. We'll see that they are arranged in parallel bundles that are going to run the entire length of the muscle. They are also multinucleated. So one muscle cell will have multiple nuclei, which are serving as these dark purple dots in here. And you could see this as being one muscle cell, and here are the multiple nuclei. And notice how they are on the periphery of the cell, not in the center as what we are used to seeing. We'll see that those striations are created by alternating light and dark bands, and we'll dive into what exactly creates those bands when we get into our chapter on muscle tissue. And this muscle is not going to contract unless it is stimulated by the somatic nervous system, and this nervous system is voluntary. Now on to our cardiac muscle tissue. This is confined to middle layer of our heart wall, which is called the myocardium. You could see it in here highlighted, and it's going to be responsible for our heart's contraction in order to pump blood. We'll see visible striations on this type of muscle tissue as well, but instead of being long cells like we saw with our skeletal muscle, they're going to be short branched cells. So you could see some of that branching taking place in here. There are several good examples of this if you search online, and some even outline the cell itself. We'll see that these cells are going to have 1 to 2 nuclei, and this nucleus will be pretty much in the center of each of the cardiac cells. And the cells are going to be connected by a special structure known as intercalated discs. So you could see some of these intercalated discs in here. They just look like these short walls almost created between the cardiac cells. And they're there to help strengthen the connection between the cells, and they promote rapid conduction of electrical activity. These cells are going to be involuntary, meaning we can't really consciously control them. They are going to be also internally controlled with our pacemaker cells, which are known as our non-contractile cardiac muscle cells. So this is how the heart kind of initiates its own pace of its electrical signals. Now onto our smooth muscle tissue. This is going to be visceral or involuntary muscle tissue is what it's known as. Visceral because it is going to be found within our organs, especially in areas like our digestive organs and our blood vessels. And it's involuntary because we don't have conscious control. This muscle tissue is called smooth because it lacks striations, especially if you look down here. There are no striations present, and it appears nice and smooth. And the cell shape is going to be spindle shaped, meaning it's going to be a little bit fatter or wider in the center, and then will taper out as we move toward the periphery of the cell here. Our cells are going to be short, and they'll have just one nucleus that'll be found in the center of the cell. We're going to find this in areas like the walls of our intestines, the stomach, airways, bladder, uterus, and blood vessels. And by being present in these types of organs, it's going to help to propel movement of some type of substance within this type of organ. So if we're in the stomach, obviously we're moving through food. In the airways, we're moving air. In the bladder, we're moving urine, and so forth. And like I mentioned before, we do not have voluntary control over this muscle.